The easiest DIY methods to fix holes in your Jon Boat. Most important thing to remember is that it's a Jon Boat, not a submarine. And no matter how much goop and slop and rivet fixing and welding and all the stuff that you do to try to keep water out of it, it will never be a submarine. It's a Jon Boat. It will probably always have water in it in some form or fashion. So get over it. And let's get into this podcast. Hello and welcome. Hello, we're back for another podcast. And this one, we're going to be covering one of the videos that I did on my YouTube channel. It's called Easy DIY Methods to Fix Holes in a Jon Boat. Posted this video 4 years ago, so it was a little outdated. But what we're going to do is we're going to go through all the questions that I had in the comments, try to answer them, and try to update some of the information that's in this video. Because over the last 4 years of working on Jon Boats full time here in the shop, you're watching this on YouTube, you can see, and here in the shop now, we got trailer project behind me, boat builds going on over there, we got stuff going everywhere. But after 4 years of working on Jon Boats pretty much full-time for a living, I've learned a thing or two about holes and water and leaks and all that stuff, and I'm here to share it with you. Before we jump into the podcast topics, take just a moment to thank all of our channel sponsors. We got Twitch Pause, TTP Outdoors, excellent clothing brand. They got some awesome outdoor shirts that have the UPF protection in them. I use them all the time when I'm fishing. They make a bunch of really awesome hats. The one I'm wearing tonight is one of their floating hats. So if you're in one of those unfortunate events where you're running Mop Jesus down the lake or the river or whatever, and your hat catches the wind just in the right direction and it comes flying off of your head, it won't sink to the bottom of the lake. This one actually floats, which is really cool. And Twitch Pause, not just a clothing brand that sponsors us here. It's the stuff that I actually wear. I wear it all the time when I'm fishing. Great stuff, great American company. Owner's super nice guy. Can't say enough good stuff about them. Also, don't forget about our other channel sponsors, Freedom Lube, One Hit Wonder Paint, Tiny Boat Nation. I've got coupon codes to every single one of those places, including Twitch Pause, down in the description. If you are watching this on a podcast platform or if you are on YouTube, it is in the description box below the video. So now that I've filled your head with sponsorship stuff, let's fill your head with some information about fixing holes in Jon Boats. So even though this video is 4 years old, all the methods that I talked about in this video, which we'll go over quickly here in just a second, but all those methods for filling holes in your Jon Boat are still relevant today. I do things a little bit different here in the shop than I did in this video, but these are like easy ways that you can fix a hole in your Jon Boat at home. Tried to stay super basic with like sealed in rivets and show the difference between regular pop rivets or blind rivets versus the sealed in rivets. We went over some 5200 and some other kind of sealants like JB Weld. And then finally we went over Brazing, which is like, I personally think is the easiest way for people at home to permanently fix a hole in a Jon Boat. And that's one thing I want to cover, like before we even get into the questions at the very beginning of this, is you need to understand there's a difference between just sealing up a leak or patching up a leak and permanently fixing a leak. The thing about Jon Boats, especially riveted Jon Boats, is that they flex a lot. They flex when they're on the trailer going to the lake, to the river, to the ocean, wherever you're taking your Jon Boat. They're just constantly vibrating going down the road, and as your trailer moves, the boat's strapped down as tight as it can, but the boat still flexes. It flexes when it hits waves and when you jump over wakes, and like some of you idiots like do stuff I do and jump over beaver dams and jump over logs and running into banks, and like when you're doing diddy poles and stuff, you're slamming in front of that boat into a bank somewhere. Every time that your boat is on the water or on the trailer, it is flexing, vibrating, or moving in some way, shape, or form. And with that, the aluminum will at some point, especially on riveted boats, develop some leaks, whether that be from rivets loosening up or the factory welds where they weld all the seams of the hull up. They may get a small crack in them. Or if you go like full send and you run into something that's, harder than your aluminum, like a piece of steel or a stump or something, and you punch a hole in the bottom of your boat that's as big as your fist, you're going to have some leaks. It's just part of it. So you can go one of two directions with this. You can patch it and stop the leaking, because at some point a temporary fix is going to leak again later on down the road. And you'll learn as we go through and answer some of these questions why that happens. And it's because of vibration and movement in the aluminum. Jon Boats are very thin and they're just flexible. They're going to move. So if you put a temporary patch on there, something like JB Weld 3M 5200, and sometimes even pop rivets, like filling a small hole with a pop rivet isn't always permanent. It's probably the longest lasting of all the temporary fixes, but it's definitely not permanent. But if you want to go the permanent route, the small hole fixes are going to be buck rivets, which is what was originally installed in most all of your Jon Boat builds, which takes some special tooling and a little bit of knowledge, but it's not hard to do. But the most permanent of all is going to be a welded in patch. And that's where, say you have a hole, like an old drain plug fitting or a live well hole or something like that. We take a piece of aluminum, put it on the inside of the boat and weld it all the way around. And then from the outside of the boat, we actually fill that entire hole up full of weld, grind it down flat. So you've got the original outside of the hole now looks smooth and the inside has a giant patch on it. That is about the most permanent fix that you can get. But that wasn't the point of this video. The point of this video was talk about just easy ways that you can patch and stop leaks in your Jon Boat, at least temporarily. Now, the most effective way that I have seen to permanently patch anything bigger than, I'd say, a quarter is going to be with an aluminum patch and 3M5200 and rivets. It's a combination of all three. So let's just say you have a hole where you used to have a through hole fitting on the side for like a bilge pump or something like that, and you don't want that hole there anymore. What you can do is take you a piece of thin aluminum, you know, 063, a piece of 090, something thin. It doesn't have to be 1/8 inch, something thinner than 1/8 inch. You want to cut it bigger than the hole. So let's just say for reference size, you have a hole the size of a quarter. You're going to want to cut something that's probably 4 inches by 4 inches minimum. Just a little square of aluminum. And what you can do is you can coat, you know, basically make your own gasket material out of 5200. So you're going to coat the inside of that patch and slap it on the inside of the boat covering that hole. You find some way to fasten it, either with a clamp or, you know, something just to keep it in place, while you drill holes from the outside to the inside of the boat and use some 3/16 rivets to rivet that patch in place. Now, you're going to need to use sealed rivets as this is below the water line, and you're probably going to want to put 5200 on those rivets as well so that the rivets themselves don't leak. So Anthony Jones from Brigade Boats did a video on this exact topic not too long ago, and he goes through a very detailed process on how to do it. I'm just explaining it to you real quick and easy because one of the questions that we're going to get into is how I actually filled the hole in the bottom of my boat, because I had a live well hole in the bottom of my boat, and this is how I fixed it, with a patch of 090, 3M5200, and riveted all the way around. Basically just like one big giant band-aid. And it does work. It's still holding up today, 4 years later. Now, that's not to say that somewhere down the road it may start leaking. You know, you're depending on 5200 to seal that forever. And while 5200, you know, 3M5200, if you're not aware, is really one of the greatest marine adhesive sealants ever made. It's got its own little quirks. You know, it takes a long time to dry and fully cure. It's like anti-seize. Like once you open up that tube, you just get white 3M5200 everywhere. It's like impossible to keep it inside the tube forever. It is kind of expensive for how much you get, and it's pretty much a one-time use. Once you open up that tube, you may get a few days out of it, a week out of it, but then after that, it starts to harden, and it's usually junk after that. So, but that patching method is probably the most permanent of all the methods besides using a buck rivet or welding. So that's kind of the overall stance of this, but let's get into some of the questions. One viewer asked, what type of bolts do you recommend for replacing handles and transom bracing? I just replaced the transom in a 1998 Lund WC16 and need to use new bolts on the transom brace and handles. So on my boat, I use stainless, and that's what we use here in the shop. It's just regular, off-the-shelf, whatever you can get at Ace Hardware, Lowe's, Home Depot, stainless bolt. Pretty much anything Jon Boat related, 1/4-20 size is what I go with, and just whatever the length is you need to get through your transom. I've actually got my entire transom is bolted into my boat with 1/4-20 bolts, and it's been on there for years and haven't had any problems. And it's what we pretty much, you know, if we have to put a cleat, a handle, you know, some kind of mounting bracket, anything on a boat here in the shop, that is what we use, is 1/4-20 bolts. We actually buy them in packs of hundreds. I've got like boxes of them everywhere. The stainless 1/4-20 is pretty much what we use for everything when it comes to bolting. Another comment said, got any tips for repairing or armor plating the bottom of a boat for rocky rivers? I bashed the bottom of the boat before the transom, creating a large lip. I caught a rock recently and tore a hole in the back. Currently JB welded, but want to put some plate in to protect it. Ever done or tried anything like this? Cheers from Alberta, Canada. Oh, we got Canadians watching. Thank you, Canada, for your wonderful tariffs, maple syrup, and Alanis Morissette. Aside from that, I don't know anything about Canada. But apparently you guys like to hit rocks and put holes in the bottom of your Jon Boat. So as far as armor plating goes, on a typical ribbed Jon Boat, there's not a easy and effective way to do it. About the only way that you're really ever going to, and I'm going to say this in air quotes, armor plate a boat is going to be with UHMW, which is a polyplastic bottom like you see on a lot of airboats. And with the ribs in a Jon Boat, I don't think it's really feasible. One, and two, most of the boats that you see poly put into, they're screwed or rib nutted into at least an 1/8 inch bottom boat. You ain't gonna find many Jon Boats that are 1/8 inch bottom. Most of them are between like 062, 063 up to about 100 gauge. Typically, your older Jon Boats are the ones that we work on the most popular Jon Boats are going to be in that 80 to 90 range. So even if you were to take the time to like cut strips of UHMW and run it in between the ribs, I don't know how long, because I've never tested it, but I don't know how long it would actually hold up like long-term bolting or riveting those in, or even rib nutting them in, just because of the amount of movement in the bottom of a Jon Boat. Really, in those kind of situations, a Jon Boat is not the appropriate tool for that job. If you're running rocky rivers to where you're constantly hitting the bottom, you actually need a boat that has a poly bottom, or you need a boat with a very thick hull, something like a 3/16 quarter-inch hull that's all welded that can take that kind of abuse. Jon Boat's never, ever going to be able to take the abuse of bashing into rocks. It's a thin, cheap boat. That's what they're for. Another question here says, I just got an inch-by-inch hole in my boat. Any thoughts on the best way to fix that? When you get up to anything over, like I said, about the size of a nickel or a quarter, that patch method is the best way to do it. And here's another comment here. It says, buy some 050 aluminum and make patches with 3M 5200 and rivet it in place. That's exactly what I would do with a hole that big, if you don't have the ability or time or money to go get it welded. If it were me, because I have an aluminum welder, I would aluminum weld it, but I would do it the same way that we do with the 5200 patch. I would actually cut a piece, stick it on the inside of the boat, weld it to the inside of the boat, and then fill that entire hole up with weld. You're basically using the patch as a material piece, like a backing piece, to weld that hole in, and then you can grind it. It's more cosmetic on the front. Most of your structural and your actual leakage stopping is going to be that patch on the back. But the 5200 patch works very, very well, especially for a DIYer. You don't have the ability to get it welded, but welding is always going to be the best. Another question says, looked at all of your transom videos, but didn't see how you attach the wood through the back of the transom. Did you use bolts, rivets, or what? My old Jon Boat is a Sears Game Fisher, has some type of rivets that attach a keystone-shaped piece of plywood to the outside of the transom. It's about a 5-inch piece of plywood along the top and the inside, again, using some type of long rivet. So a lot of those older Sears Game Fishers and the older tracker toppers had like a little trapezoid piece of plywood on the outside, and then they would have a 3/4-inch piece of plywood on the inside to act as transom. The only purpose for that little trapezoidal piece on the back was just to increase the thickness of the transom without having to put a full sheet of plywood inside the transom, and that makes it a lot easier for your outboards and trolling motors and stuff to bolt on there. But as far as attaching my transom, so my transom in my boat is 2 pieces of 3/4-inch plywood, and they are screwed and glued together, and then the outside of it is coated with fiberglass resin, like polyester fiberglass resin. Now, for holding it to the inside of my boat, like how it is actually held to the skin of the transom, mine is bolted in, and I use those 1/4 20 bolts. Now, my boat is older. I think it's a 70 or 71 model low. Mine had a transom brace, so it had a brace that went from the floor up to the transom itself, and that brace had like, I think, 4 or 6 bolts in it that bolted from the skin through the transom and into that brace, and then the other end of that brace, kind of angles down like 45 degrees and goes down to the floor. I don't really think those are necessary. We wind up taking most of those out of just about every boat we build here in the shop, but we also do aluminum transom replacements. Most of the time, we don't do wood transoms. So if somebody comes in, needs a transom job, we're pulling the wood out, we're putting an all aluminum transom in it. My boat was, used mainly for filming for YouTube, so it was a lot of DIY stuff. So that's why I did the plywood transom. But yeah, it's all held in with just bolts. That's it. I didn't use any rivets at all. Now, when we do aluminum transoms, we actually do rivet and weld those into the transom skin. A lot of it depends on I would say, the health of the aluminum on the back of the boat. We get a lot of older boats in where the inside of the transom skin is pitted from having pressure treated plywood or pressure treated 2x8s or whatever they used from the factory, because that was a thing back in the day when they put transoms in. We didn't know that the copper in the coating that they used to do the pressure treating was gonna be harmful long term to aluminum. So if we got one that is pitted pretty decently, a lot of times we will actually weld those in like little stitches. Like every 8 or so inches we'll put a little stitch just to hold the skin to the actual transom itself. But then from the outside of the transom skin, we'll use sealed in rivets, and we'll actually put about 10 or 12 sealed in rivets on each side and a couple down the middle to hold that transom skin and the actual transom framing together. Now, if we got one that's in really, really bad shape where the transom skin's got like a ton of holes in it, we usually just cut the entire back end of the boat off. Like we just take a Sawzall and a Ziz wheel and we just draw a line straight down the back of the boat. We cut the entire back end of the boat off, put a whole new transom skin on it with 090, and then we put our new transom framing on the inside and we weld it all. No rivets. That's just how we do it. But if you're using plywood or any other kind of wood, bolting is the way to go. I probably wouldn't use any rivets to install a transom in a Jon Boat. So another question here is asking, would you use the sealed end rivets in 5200 versus solid rivets that you'd have to buck? I'm restoring an old 57 Sea King V-hull, and it has the solid ones. I'm looking for something that will last a long time. If your goal in fixing a leaking rivet is longevity, like you don't ever want to do it again, buck rivets would be the way to go. Now, you are going to have to buy a bucking tool, which is a lot of people make them themselves, and there's nothing wrong with that, but it's not the appropriate tool for the job. But they do actually make pieces that go into, I don't remember the name of that thing. It's like an air hammer, but it's a pneumatic air tool that you plug into your air compressor, and it has basically a ram arm on the end of it that vibrates very quickly in and out. And you use a dolly or something hard. I've seen people use like big steel mauls and giant chunks of lead. You can use anything hard to hold the rivet from the inside, and you use the air chisel or air hammer from the outside to buck that rivet into place. And what you're doing is you're compressing that rivet to the point to where it actually seals the hole and has a tight enough hold to where it actually holds the outside of the boat to whatever it is on the inside or the seam that it's trying to hold. Longevity wise, those are the best way to go. If you're willing to spend the time, because it does take a little bit more time, actually it takes a lot more time to do a bucking rivet, because you got to have most of the time someone to get inside the boat, hold that piece of dolly or a piece of steel or a big maul or something heavy, a big hammer on the back side of it. You got to set up on the outside, make sure you are both pushing at the exact same time before you squeeze that trigger, and then buck the rivet into place. With a sealed in pop rivet, it's just a matter of drilling the hole out to the appropriate size, putting the rivet in rivet gun, squeezing, and you're done. Like it's over and it's finished. It's easy and quick. I guess the way that I would look at it is, if you're planning on keeping the boat long term, and I say more than a couple of years, and you're willing to take the time to do it right, go ahead and do the bucking rivets. Ask around, because you may have a friend that already owns one of those air hammers or air chisels. A lot of people really think about it, but like when you buy like your first air compressor tool set, a lot of times you get those little multi-piece tool sets where you get like a 1/2 inch impact, a 3/8 impact, and usually they come with a air chisel or an air hammer. And then all you need is that little bucking bar that goes on the end of it, or the little bucking rod. I can't remember what the technical name for it is. It's been a long time since I bought one. But if you get on Amazon or get on Google and search for air chisel bucking tool, it'll pop right up. And they're usually 20 or 30 bucks for a decent one. And like I said, if you got an old air chisel that you're not using anymore, you can cut the end off of it, drill it out to where it's concave and fits one of those bucking rivets, and you can do it that way too. If you're not planning on keeping the boat long term, I'd say a year or two, and you're planning on getting rid of it, there's nothing wrong with doing a sealed in pop rivet with some 5200 on that. It'll more than likely hold up for at least a few years, as long as you don't do nothing super crazy with the boat. Don't be out jumping beaver dams and trying to beach it on a sandbar every weekend, and you'll probably be fine. So another question asked, does taking the seats out affect the structural integrity at all? Also, I have a tear crack about 1.5 inches long, 3 to 5 millimeters wide by my drain plug in my Jon Boat. Will brazing be strong enough to fix that, do you think? Do you have to sealant over it right now? Or no, I have sealant over it right now, because that is what I had on hand. So a couple of things. First off, it's going to be the seats. So in this video, I was in the process of tearing my boat down. I took all the bench seats out of it, and that's why I was filling in all the holes in the boat in the first place. I did not put any of the bench seats back into the boat because I was doing a full build on the boat. I think it's an 8-foot long front deck. I put catwalks in, and I have a very small back deck. It's maybe like 1.5 feet or so. And it's really not even a deck. It's just, I keep my gas tank up underneath it, and I wanted a flat space to put my cutting board when I cut up bait and stuff, or when I'm catfishing. But as far as taking the bench seats out, yes, it 100% affects the structural integrity of the boat. The benches in a Jon Boat are the only thing that tie the two sides of the boat together, other than the ribs. And over the years, I have learned it is actually better to not remove the bench seats, but actually cut them out, but leave about 2 inches of material where they're riveted to the side of the boat to act as a rib. So you're still getting that, structural integrity that the bench seat had, but you're not having that whole entire bench there. Now, you can't take all of the seats out of your boat. Taking the middle one out is probably okay for most Jon boats. I don't think it's going to really hurt anything. You will notice that your boat's going to flex a lot more, especially if you got a high-powered outboard or a mud motor on it, to where you're going down the lake. You'll actually be able to look down the side of your boat at, like 15 to 20 miles an hour, and you can see the sides just kind of flexing and moving and vibrating a little bit. If you take all the bench seats out, like I did the first time I tested it out, I could actually see the sides of my boat moving like an inch or two at a time. I would not recommend that. But with, most builds, most people that build Jon boats, they're putting some kind of decking in there, or at least catwalks or something. So as long as you have something running from side to side on the boat to tie the two sides together, you're usually fine. If you want a big, wide open boat, so you just basically want a giant Jon boat bathtub, that's when it kind of gets into a sticky situation, is you need to either weld framing in so where it can handle that, but you're better off in the long run getting a boat that's actually designed to be open face, because they have much more significant and sturdy ribs in there that actually hold the sides in, and they're usually welded and not riveted. You want to take the middle bench seat out? No biggie. I say go for it. I've done it on a bunch of boats. They hold up just fine. Take all the benches out. You need to put something back in there. Something is better than nothing. So another question asked, what do you suggest is the best way to fill bolt holes in the transom? I'll be honest, the best way to fill bolt holes is with bolts. I know that sounds really stupid, but hear me out. We have a lot of people that come in and want to do like welding patch jobs, but they don't want to spend the money on, the time that it takes to weld stuff, and the expertise and the equipment and the argon and all the welding wire and the cleaning and the stuff we have to move out of the way to get to it and weld it safely. A lot of times, if you've got an old bolt hole in your transom, you can get a small, flat, like machine style bolt where it has a Phillips head on one end, put a washer on there with some 5200, and just stick a bolt back in the bolt hole. That will, one, take up the space, and two, seal it up so you don't have to worry about it anymore, but you won't have this giant bolt head sticking out, a little bit more low profile. That's honestly the best way ever to fill bolt holes. So another question asked, do you have a preference of solid rivets versus the sealed rivets? I have the means to install solid rivets, but wasn't sure if it was worth the extra work. The answer to that is it depends. If it's I really prefer welding over all of them, and that's me talking as someone who welds aluminum like all the time. And I have a welder here, so it's easy and convenient for me to weld stuff up. But between sealed in pop rivets and buck rivets, I really like buck rivets the best, only because I know that generally, once I install a buck rivet, I'm probably never going to have to worry about that one ever again. Now, with that being said, I can't tell you how many thousands of sealed in rivets we have been through in this shop, and I have yet to have anybody come back with one that was leaking. They work. I mean, they do work. How long they work for, I don't know. I've had some customers report back that they installed them themselves and they lasted a couple years. I've had some that, had them for several years and still running around with them and no problems. I've got them on my boat and they're, seem to be working fine. But with pop rivets, it's really just a matter of how you use your boat. If you abuse the hell out of your boat, we'll probably go ahead and go with a buck rivet. Another question asked, actually not even a question, this is a statement. This person said, 5200 sealant sucks. Use JB Weld. I'm going to highly disagree with that. 5200 is some pretty awesome stuff. If you don't know, I have the float pods on the back of my boat are glued on there with 5200 and a few rivets, and 5200 is pretty freaking awesome. Not saying that JB Weld's a bad product. I do like JB Weld. I think it has its place. Me personally, I use JB Weld more as like Bondo. When we do some welding stuff and then we grind the outside of the boat down, if I got like just minor little areas that didn't flatten out all the way, I'll use the JB Weld like Bondo, spread it on there and then grind it off or sand it off, whatever I'm doing. But I've had much better luck long-term with 5200 than I have with JB Weld. I have had a few projects where I've used JB Weld, and I've had a few places where the JB Weld's cracked because you can't put it on very thick. You put JB Weld on super thick, doesn't always hold up long term. I've also had some applications where I've done it in like the side of a hole that was really thin. I did it in an 062 hole one time, or I think it was 063, and it was a really thin hole, and we tried to fix it with JB Weld. It had a little small crack in it, held up for about a year, and then the JB Weld just kind of fell out of it, and that's because the amount of vibration that the hole has when it's going down the lake and when it's on the trailer. It's one of those things. I personally use a lot of 3M 5200. We use it a lot here in shop. I know the shop up in Illinois uses it a lot. Just about everybody I know uses 3M 5200, and we all absolutely love it. It works great. It is expensive, and it is a pain in the butt to deal with because it goes everywhere, but it's good stuff. So another question here. I have a small crack at one of the bolt holes where the transom mounts. Should I try brazing the crack or put a patch over it? Brazing is probably the best method if you're going to do a DIY and you don't have access to welding, or taking it to a welder is out of the question. Brazing would be the best thing that you could do. Then after you braze it, you can kind of grind it down and make it look kind of factory again, and then re-drill that hole to put your bolt back through. It's a pretty common problem, especially on older Jon Boats and aluminum fatigues, depending on which series of aluminum they use. At the 4000 series and a 5000 series, not cracks as much as 4000. Some of them just get old and brittle, and you'll see a lot of bolt hole areas where, especially on transoms, because transoms move so much with the motor, you can get little cracks on those bolt holes. And if you're not going to weld, that's the easiest way to do it, is to braze it up. Just be careful when you're brazing on transoms that are wood, so that skin can dissipate heat really, really fast. That aluminum just like pulls the heat out of it, and you can set a wood transom on fire pretty quick. Also, be careful of foam. If you got foam anywhere near the area that you're going to be brazing, foam is highly flammable. We have caught a few boats on fire here in this shop while we were welding, and they go foam. When it gets going, it makes really big fire really fast. So if you're going to do it, keep a water hose or a fire extinguisher very, very close to you. So another question here is, I'm thinking of ways to patch the holes in my Jon Boat, because when I drilled out the original rivets to replace the foam, I absolutely butchered all the holes, and now I can't seal them with new rivets. I think I'm going to want to use brazed aluminum. What would you personally do? I would also say there are about 10 holes I need to patch. In this case, it really depends on the size of the hole. If your rivets were originally 3/16, a lot of times you can just drill that out to the next size, which is 1/4 inch, and then you can install 1/4 inch rivets. So if your holes are kind of wallered out or ovaled or whatever, just take a drill bit that's 1/4 inch, drill it out to the next size up, and put a 1/4 inch rivet. I do believe they make rivets bigger than 1/4 inch. If you just want something easy, you can order some of those bigger rivets and just drill up to the next hole size, and then just pop those new bigger rivets in there, and you'll be perfectly fine. Now, if that's not an option, if you've already drilled the hole out too big and you can't find a rivet that fits that anymore, another easy option is a bolt. If you don't have, like, if it's not on the sidewall that's going to be showing on the inside of the boat, like say it's like kind of down the sidewall and like it goes underneath the deck or something, you can, just like we talked about earlier, you can take a little bolt, get a fender washer, put some 5200 on that, put the bolt through the hole, and a lock nut on the backside, tighten it up, and that's just about as good as doing a rivet. But if you want to take the time to do the brazing, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. I would, depending on the size of the hole, if it's a little bit bigger of a hole than you saw me do in this video, so I'd say probably anything bigger than a 1/4 inch or so, I'd probably get some pieces of aluminum, use it as a backer, like put it on the inside of the boat. That way you got something to hold that brazing material when you're brazing, that hole up. Because on those big holes, sometimes it's hard to get enough of that brazing material molten down in there and then let it kind of cool and freeze long enough to where you can put more in there. And it's just like kind of a delicate balance. You'll get it heated up just enough to start putting more in there, and then the whole thing gets really hot and all the brazing material falls through that hole, and it's really annoying. So if you got a little backer plate, something that brazing material can kind of rest against, that will help a lot. So another question here is, the last step necessary? Could I overlook the marine epoxy and get away with it? So what he's talking about, or whoever this him, her person, this commenter, or whatever this commenter is talking about, in the video, when I got done brazing, I ground the outside of the brazing down flat so it was flush against the side of my boat, and then I took JB Weld and used it like Bondo to fill it all in. I do that for a couple of reasons, and no, it's not 100% necessary. I do it, and my reasoning is, one, I want it to look flush on the outside of the boat, and instead of using Bondo, I use a JB Weld because it is an epoxy, and if I did miss anything or I got any small pinholes in that brazing, the epoxy will help fill those and keep them, from leaking in the future. Also, the thing that I've noticed over the years with using Bondo on aluminum is when you go to sanding on Bondo, it usually winds up being pretty darn smooth. And I can usually get Bondo smoother than I can the aluminum around it. So what happens is you'll do a Bondo, you'll cover up a dent or something, or a little ding, or like this where I braze something over. You cover it with Bondo, sand it all down, and you'll get it it feels smooth and flush to the side of the boat. And then you go to paint it, and then you can see the area underneath the paint that you put the Bondo in, because it will be just smooth as glass. But then the aluminum around it will have a little bit of orange peel to it. And it just, for me, it's a visual thing. It just makes it pop out of the paint more than anything. So I like to use the JB Weld because when you sand it, it tends to have about the same texture as the aluminum. Personal preference thing, you don't have to do it, but I showed it in the video because it's what I do. Another question here is actually starts out with a comment. It just says, heads up, 3M 5200 doesn't recommend using alcohol as cleaner. They say it will prevent curing. I know that's the only thing that cleans it off your hands is alcohol, so I think there's some truth to their claim. Send it. Yee. To be honest with you, I haven't used alcohol to clean 3M 5200 in a really long time. I think I did in that video is because it's what I had handy. Nowadays, I mainly use acetone or brake parts cleaner. Brake parts cleaner is probably the best. I don't know. I'm sure it's really, really bad for you, but I spray it on a rag to get the 3M 5200 off my hands, and it seems to work really well. I'm sure that when I'm older from all of the exposure to brake cleaner that I've had over the years, one of my ears is going to fall off or I'm going to start growing an extra leg. Yeah, I have never really sat down and read about what you can and can't do with 3M 5200 because we've just had such good luck with it over the years. We just use it all the time. And nowadays, we don't even keep alcohol here in the shop. We mainly use either acetone. Every now and then I use naphtha, some lacquer thinner when I'm actually painting stuff, but 9 times out of 10 we're using acetone. So I don't know if that's 100% correct about alcohol. If you took time to leave it in the comments, so I'm pretty sure it's true. So if you're watching this and you're thinking about using 3M 5200, no alcohol. But all the 3M 5200 that I installed on my boat was, the surface was prepped with alcohol before I put the 3M 5200 on, and I haven't had any adverse effects from it. Everything is still on there where I put the 3M 5200, and I haven't had any problems. Not saying that I won't maybe one day down the road, but for the last 4 years, it seems like it's holding up pretty well. So the last thing I want to cover, and I got quite a few questions on this, is about overall general sprays and goops and slops and stuff you put on the bottom of your boat, like Flex Seal, Raptor Liner, Bed Liner products, Hercules, the stuff they sell at Harbor Freight. I have a very strong opinion on stuff like that, and my opinion comes from a welder's perspective. So my advice is, if you think that at some point you may want to get a hole or a crack welded in your boat, don't put anything in it. Just wait until you have the time to go and the money to go get it welded. My biggest headache as a welder and somebody who works on Jon Boats a lot is when somebody brings me something that has been leaking for years and they have tried to apply silicone or 5200 or anything of the sorts into that crack or hole. I'm not a metal expert by any means, but I can tell you from personal experience, I feel like aluminum is a sponge, and anything that you put on it kind of soaks into the material. And no matter how much grinding and drilling and deburring and all the different things that I have done to try to get that crap out of the aluminum so that I can weld it, it just seems like it never ever wants to come out. I've had so many instances where we've had somebody come in that needed a patch or something, and they had silicone or 3M 5200 on their boat to cover up that hole or that crack, and I spent hours cleaning it out with wire brush and grinding it, wiping it with acetone and burning it out with a torch. And I think that I got everything out of it. I go to start welding. I get about halfway through a pass, and then all of a sudden it just goes pop and blows up right in my face. The whole weld puddle falls through. I got an even bigger hole in the boat now. I got weld splatter all over me. And it's because that I could be totally wrong, but I'm telling you from my personal experience, like I feel like the aluminum just soaks all that crap up, and it just gets deep down in there, and there's just no way to get it out until you start welding it and you put enough heat to it, and finally it just goes pop and explodes. If you've never had that experience, it is an awakening experience. It'll scare the crap out of you when it finally happens, but it's not fun, and I don't recommend it. So if you think you're going to get it welded later on, don't do anything to it. Put a piece of duct tape over it if you have to, like, just get home, or you just got one more fishing trip before you can take it and get it welded. If you have no intention of ever getting it welded, like you're like, screw this boat, I'm just going to throw something on there, it's your boat, do whatever you want. I don't care. I can't see it from my driveway. If I was in that situation to where I was like, my only fix is a DIY fix, I would go with the aluminum patch and 3M 5200 before I ever thought about spraying the entire bottom of my boat with anything, including Flex Seal. Flex Seal is the one that I get the most comments and questions about. And I'll tell you from personal experience here in this shop, if you show up here and you have sprayed Flex Seal on your boat, I'm not working on your boat. Not how. I don't care how much money you got. I'm gonna tell you to go buy a new boat, because it is not worth anything at that point. Flex Seal is the biggest pain in the butt to get off to do any welding work or modification work to. It's not even worth messing with. So you show up here with a boat covered in Flex Seal, I'm going to tell you to have a nice day. See you later. Bye. Now, with all that being said, I would like to hear your input. I want to redo this video at some point in the future. I would like to do more detailed, thorough explanation of all of this stuff, because this video is kind of quick and just an overview of how to do it at home if you're interested in doing it. But I would like to revisit this subject at some point and do much more detailed, but also include the patching, because I did not do that in this video. Patching is an important skill to learn if you're going to work on Jon boats. But also go over the bucking of rivets, because that seems to be like a big mystery to people. I know there's a ton of videos on YouTube. I don't know why people don't watch them. So if there's any other techniques that you would like to see me cover the next time I do this video, or any particular scenarios that you want to see, let me know in the comment section if you're watching this on YouTube. If you're watching this on a podcast platform, my email is in the podcast notes, show notes section. You can shoot me an email and tell me what you'd like to see. I will gladly include that next time that I do this video.
If you are interested in seeing behind the scenes at Send It Jon Boats, getting access to my personal vlog where I show you what it's like to work in a boat shop full time, then you should definitely check out our YouTube channel memberships. We have several levels of membership that get you access to different kind of perks, like early access to new videos that are coming out on YouTube, personalized video answers to your questions, and you'll get to see all the cool boat projects that I work on that I don't post here on YouTube. If you think that's something you like, definitely go over to the Send It Jon Boats YouTube channel page and sign up today. If you don't want to do that, then you're probably just a scooter.
And with that, if there's anything else that you guys want me to cover in a future or upcoming podcast, let me know. I'm glad you got to see me, and I'll catch you on the next one.